Kaveh has quite the reputation in the Genshin community. He's really well known for having such a strong personality and story. His lore in the 3.6 event really helped develop his character outside of just being Alhaitham's roommate. Unfortunately, while his story is beloved by many, his combat in game leaves a lot to be desired. Welcome back to another episode of Unit 2.0. Today, we're going to be covering Kaveh's kit and what steps we can take to make it better. I feel like his design is very similar to Dia's. There was a decent idea in concept, and all the pieces were there, but the execution of it just got really screwed up. All we need to do is reassemble the puzzle and create something a bit more cohesive. As always, additional disclaimers, timestamps, social media links, and music credits are down below. So without further ado, let's start blooming. Oh my god! First, we need to cover his original kit and explore the main flaws with his design. Kaveh is designed to be someone who can enable bloom reactions with his on-fielding. He's also designed to have abilities that can detonate cores early, and he can increase the bloom damage your party deals. Currently, he has 3 main archetypes for teams. The first is a regular bloom comp, which is a team mainly dedicated to dealing damage via the standard cores. The second archetype is a Nilou bloom comp, which is the same as a regular bloom comp, just with the Nilou buffs attached. The last archetype is a hyper bloom or Burgeon comp, which ignores most of Kaveh's utility and puts him more in line as a Dendro driver. For the sake of simplifying the terms, I will be using Specialized Bloom when I refer to Hyper Bloom and Burgeon together. As an additional thing, if I use the term Bloom-based, it refers to every single archetype relating to Bloom. So Bloom-based damage, for example, means any damage dealt by Bloom, Hyper Bloom, or Burgeon cores. A Bloom-based team just refers to all the archetypes listed above. With that side note out of the way, the main issue with Kaveh's kit is that in all of these teams, he either provides no special value or is completely anti-synergistic. His capacity to apply Dendro for Bloom is good, but his other forms of utility just don't work with him. For starters, his skill's ability to detonate cores can only occur once every 6 seconds, which is a massive window between core detonation. By the time you finish your cooldown, you've generated way too much already. And on top of that, enemies can only take bloom damage twice every 0.5 seconds, so having like 5 on the field and then blowing it all up will waste 3 of the cores. His C6 reduces this special detonation to a 3-second cooldown, but even still, it's a bit too long and cores will still be wasted. But since Nilou is also a bloom unit, then surely Kaveh will be perfect with her, right? Well, because Nilou's bountiful cores can instantly pop, Kaveh finds little use in his detonating ability, and she provides a massive damage bonus to bloom cores. While Kaveh can add to that bonus, it feels like a drop in the ocean. In short, yes, Kaveh does work with Nilou, but not by a lot. So because his pure bloom teams are anti-synergistic, people feel more inclined to run him as a driver for specialized bloom teams. The downside is that his bloom damage bonus only applies to regular bloom cores. So in these teams, Kaveh's just a driver with no utility, making any other Dendro on-fielder a better option by comparison. As always, my goal with the rework is less focused on the numbers and meta aspect, and more on actual synergy and functionality. I aim to improve his utility in every facet of Bloom-based teams. This means seeing significant buffs to his regular Bloom playstyle. Meanwhile, Nilou Bloom teams will see a slightly better performance, but nothing special in terms of new mechanics. And finally, we'll add some buffs to make him a more viable option in the specialized Bloom teams. Let's move on to the actual rework. For my skill rework, we're bringing his C4 into his base kit, and then buffing that even further. Kaveh will summon Mayrock, which will scan the area around him and instantly detonate all Bloom cores. He will then gain a special effect for 14 seconds. When Kaveh's basic attacks hit opponents, Mayrock will trigger Pyridae's Light, dealing damage based on its attack and detonating all Bloom cores. We'll keep it consistent with his C6's damage, so at talent level 8, it's 61.3% attack. The cooldown between instances of this attack will default at 1 second. However, your various team comps will affect this. If a party consists of at least 1 Pyro or Electro unit, Kaveh's cooldown between instances of Pyridae's Light will be increased to 3 seconds. When you run Kaveh in the pure Bloom teams, the rate of his popping is significantly fast, with the cooldown only being 1 second. This allows you to generate and detonate cores almost instantly without reaching the upper limit in the process. That means every core can deal damage, preventing you from wasting them. When you add Electro or Pyro into the mix, this attack rate slows to a cooldown of 3 seconds. This effectively prevents Kaveh from stealing cores as much as he would if the cooldown was still 1 second. That way, your Electro or Pyro unit can take most of the ownership when triggering their reactions. Back then, Kaveh's ability to synergize with specialized bloom comps worked, but this new mechanic now makes it an intended design. For new particle generation, we'll just make it front-load 4 Dendro particles upon his initial cast. And for other side info, the new coordinated attack can apply Dendro once every 3 seconds, so in a regular bloom comp where the cooldown is only 1 second, you can't rely on just that attack to provide the Dendro aura for your bloom cores. Additionally, you will be allowed to leave the field without cancelling Kaveh's skill, but, as mentioned before, the coordinated attacks only trigger when he deals his basic attacks. It will help with flexibility in rotations, just in case you need to swap into another character for a few seconds. However, Kaveh is still designed to be an on-fielder with this rework. Finally, in order to balance his kit's higher duration and particle generation, the cooldown of his skill will now be 15 seconds instead of 6 seconds. Let's move on to his burst rework. It'll effectively be the same thing, Dendro infusion for 12 seconds and a bloom damage increase. For my first change, the burst cost is going from 80 to either 70 or 60. Building him can be somewhat tedious due to his high burst cost, and I think the first step is making his ER requirements more manageable to work with. I believe his rotations will stay the same, so despite the lower cooldown, you're still looking at a 20 to 25 second rotation, which means more time to generate energy. On top of his higher particle generation, it shouldn't be a problem getting his burst back. For the other part of his kit, his bloom damage buff now extends to Hyper Bloom and Burgeon damage. If you run him in one of these two teams, you can now buff your various triggers, which makes him provide more value there. And of course, in his Pure Bloom teams, they get the damage buff as normal. On top of this change, since Bloom has a lower multiplier than Hyper Bloom and Burgeon, we could consider making the damage bonus higher so that Kaveh's Pure Bloom teams can somewhat compete with the strength of his specialized ones. Currently, Kaveh's Bloom bonus is 44% at level 8. Let's say the specialized Bloom bonus is still at 44%, but his regular Bloom bonus is now at something like 88%. On that note, it's not possible for the Pure Blooms to match the damage of specialized Blooms without severely inflating the numbers like Nilou does. So while my rework on Kaveh is at least able to address his anti-synergy with Pure Blooms, I don't think we can really make it his best team outside of Nilou. Within a Nilou team, however, the increased Bloom damage bonus should make him a bit more viable, and some of the passive rework should help to buff that even further. For Kaveh's A1 passive, I'm just going to transfer his A4 a bit forward, so now it'll be that his various basic attacks slowly raise its EM by 25, up to a max of 100. His new A4 passive is going to see some significant buffs to his utility. When enemies take damage from Bloom, Hyper Bloom, or Burgeon, the character who triggered the reaction gains an EM bonus equal to 20% of Kaveh's EM. This effect lasts for 5 seconds, and durations are counted independently for each party member. If you've seen my signature weapon video featuring Kaveh's weapon, this bonus should look familiar. I took the idea of an EM sharing bonus and applied it to his rework, because Kaveh as an EM scaler needed a piece of utility that was actually viable. There's a lot of reasons why I chose to change the passive from its original version. For starters, Kaveh has a lot of EM scaling, but depending on your team, that EM won't hold much value for the actual reactions. If he's in a team where he's the one triggering Bloom, then that's perfect. The core scales off his EM. But if he's in a team where any other unit is a main trigger, then his EM stat doesn't matter. His other utility with EM scaling is his self-healing passive. While this is good to keep himself alive, he can't extend this to his fellow party members. So in the event that they take tons of damage, he can't heal them back up. You'd have to bring a healer as a result, which makes Kaveh's self-healing practically useless. Meanwhile, in his Hyper Bloom teams, the most common unit is going to be Kuki, who provides healing. Even if you run Raiden, Hyper Bloom cores have a smaller hitbox, so Kaveh might not be taking much damage in the first place. In Burgeon, Toma provides a shield, which can help negate some damage. All in all, every team has some sort of defensive utility that helps Kaveh's survivability already, so his self-healing isn't as important as you might think. With this passive rework, it gives him utility that's actually helpful to the party, while still retaining its EM scaling. With full EM main stats, a 165 EM weapon, and Kaveh's A1 passive, Kaveh gets 1022 EM as a baseline. Artifact substats and external buffs can further raise this, which in turn raises the bonus he provides for his team. So with this initial build, we can assume he can grant party members a minimum of around 200 EM. The main limitation I added is that only the character who owned the Bloom Core when it dealt damage gets the EM bonus. In a Bloom or Nilou Bloom team, the ownership might be shared among the entire party, so any character who triggered the Bloom reactions can have the EM bonus. In a specialized Bloom team, even if a Hydro or Dendro unit is creating the core, they don't get the EM bonus if the Electro Pyro unit is the one actually dealing the damage. This mechanic just limits the extent of Kave's EM sharing. That way, not every character in the party can get free EM. They need to fulfill the condition of actually dealing Bloom-based damage. I think now is also a good time to quickly discuss how he interacts with other EM sharing characters like Nahida, since not everyone may know how the mechanic works. Hopefully this explanation is simplified enough. Every character has 2 hidden categories of EM in their stats. I'm not sure what the official term is, so let's just call it base EM and EM % bonuses, since it'll have a similar philosophy to base attack and attack bonus. The main thing is that increasing EM by a flat amount contributes to the base EM section, while any percentage-based bonus naturally contributes to the EM % section. When taking into account any sort of EM scaling buff, the calculation won't include the EM % bonus. So let's say Kaveh has 1000 EM. If other party members deal Bloom-based damage, they get 200 EM. If Kaveh's the one dealing Bloom damage, this activates his passive on himself, which increases his EM to 1200. But since the 200 he got came from a % bonus, his A4 passive will only account for the base 1000. This mechanic is put in place to prevent the issue of infinite scaling bonuses happening within or between party members. Next, let's cover his Constellation rework. As a summary, I'll be making changes to his C4 and C6. His original C4 was that Bloom's Kaveh triggers are increased by 60%. Since he doesn't create Blooms as much, let's do this instead. When Kaveh detonates a Bloom core using Pyridase's Light, the damage is increased by 60%. This provides an additional buff to all of the regular Bloom damage, and while it may not be super powerful, it should help close the gap between a specialized Bloom team versus a regular Bloom team. It also extends the damage bonus to any Bloom core, not just ones created by Kaveh. Finally, since his C6 was implemented as part of his base kit, we have to do something about that empty slot. Let's say that when Pyridase's Light hits enemies, Kaveh will reduce their Dendro resistance by 15%, a standard red shred effect. The usual value for 4 stars red shredding is 15%, so this is consistent with other characters. It's just a nice buff to his already stacked kit, which allows all Dendro cores and Dendro characters to deal additional damage. So these are all the details covering the rework. Let's quickly cover each of his archetypes and how they're improved. Starting off with his specialized Bloom teams, Kaveh's primary role is still as a Dendro driver, but now his Burst and A4 passive provide some utility to those teams. Since his original kit had no special buffs, this is an improvement even if only a general one. Nilou Bloom teams are in the same boat. Kaveh doesn't provide special mechanics, since Nilou's various buffs already cover detonation time and damage bonus. But now, his Burst has an increased bonus to Bloom damage, and his new A4 provides additional EM, which the party can utilize. His regular Bloom teams are what see the most improvement, both in numbers and functionality. Now, when you're running this kind of team, Kaveh's rate of core detonation is much faster, preventing cores from being wasted. And just like the Nilou Bloom teams, his increased Bloom damage and EM sharing buff allows him to give his team extra utility when they trigger the reaction. But we're not stopping there. You may have noticed that his cooldown between detonation procs increases based on the presence of Pyro and Electro members, and doesn't decrease based on the amount of Hydro or Dendro units. This is because I wanted to account for some of Kaveh's lesser used Bloom teams. For example, including an Anemo unit can help with grouping enemies, which some Bloom teams want to have. Another example is that bringing a Cryo unit makes a team comp become a Shatter Bloom team. In addition to Bloom, Kaveh's Claymore hits can shatter frozen enemies, which works very well with his EM scaling kit. With these 2 versions of the regular Bloom comps, Kaveh still benefits from the 1 second hit cooldown. That way, you aren't forced to run him in a pure Dendro and Hydro comp, but can still reap the benefits of its rework buffing the pure Bloom teams. These are the improvements when it comes to his team comps, but his recommended artifact and weapon builds are more or less the same. You generally want as much EM as possible, and while ER need shouldn't be insanely high anymore, I think you would still need to find some in main or substats, maybe like 150 to 160. Meanwhile, his DPS build is still subpar. I suppose with his attack rate being 1 second on Bloom teams, he will have faster damage procs, but the multipliers are still pretty low. Alright, that's gonna do it for this Kaveh rework video. I always felt that his design was essentially a budget Nilou. but with the mechanics being completely messed up. With Hyperbloom and Burgeon unironically being some of his best teams, I wanted to shift him into a role less focused on regular Bloom, and make him someone who finds value in all Bloom-based teams. His overall playstyle stayed the same, but the utility he now provides should make his design feel consistent with that playstyle, rather than anti-synergistic. I'm gonna leave the floor to you guys now. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this rework. What did you like, what would you change, and what other ideas could we try to explore with Kaveh? If you enjoyed, consider leaving a like and subscribing to support the channel. With all that said and done, I will see you all next time. Bye!